Welcome back, you beautiful marvels. Dana and I. Hi, Dana.
Hi, Gwen. How are you?
It's like a comma. It's like Dana and I, comma. Hi, Dana.
Comma.
And then I, comma again, are here to talk to
There you
you
go.
guys, to talk to each other, to talk with each other, to talk with this community about something that we learn in psychology, but I don't see applied very often in practice. And that is the concept or the topic of consent versus assent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just even as you're introducing the topic, I'm thinking of things that can come up in therapy around consent.
Mm-hmm.
So those of you that have been in therapy before, you should have, hopefully you did, get some paperwork to sign. And one of those things was something called an informed consent. And when I teach my students about this, I say it's in the word, informed consent. So you're reading information and you're being told enough about like what you're going to be entering into to make an informed decision. Do I want to consent to this, right? If you've ever been to the doctor or like the ER or ever had a surgery, you probably aren't sitting there for an hour reading this teeny tiny print, but you're giving consent for treatment, right? And then also, this would be like adults who can give consent, who are their own custodian and so on. And I'll still even do it within some sessions sometimes. If I'm going to dig into something that's a little bit of a deeper piece than we would normally go, I'll say something to the effect of, may I, or can we, or are you okay with, sort of seeking that permission even in sessions sometimes, because it empowers the person, right?
Oh, yeah.
Lets them know you're mindful of that. Do you want to talk a little bit about people who are not their own legal guardians or custodians and what we do there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, consent is really if you hold your legal privilege to say, I give permission for this. Right. And the idea in psychology, and I mean, Dana and I are both trained to do this, which is the informed part of informed consent means that consent is something that is consistently, constantly, regularly reviewed with a client, right? And so that could be as small as, which is not a small thing, but asking for permission before maybe reflecting something that might be difficult to hear, or before moving into a topic that might be difficult to explore, but we know could potentially be helpful or beneficial for the client.
Yeah.
I think, Dana, this kept coming up for me because I have so many clients that I work with that don't hold their legal privilege because they're minors or because they're conserved, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or because they're conserved. And so the idea.
And you want to explain for folks what that means? Because I don't think that's a known term necessarily.
Yeah. Conserved is when someone else holds your legal privilege, even though you are of age of majority, you were over 18. A good example of this, which is not necessarily is Britney Spears, right? Where,
you
that
conservatorship.
Like, Britney forever, and she was conserved, right?
Yeah.
And the idea behind that is that conservatorship, and it's a hot thing right now, and maybe that's something we talk about in a different episode, but.
Right.
The idea there is that you don't hold the judgment to make healthy and safe decisions in your life.
Yeah.
So this, of course, when your legal rights are removed, I mean, this is a big thing, right? This is why this was big for Britney, and this is why this is big. I mean, even with the client.
And you have to do it. A court process has to take place to say this person is incapacitated. Yeah. You also mentioned minors, and that it varies a little bit state to state. In my state, it's 14 is what we consider the age of consent. So you can enter into therapy with like parental consent, even though you're not legally allowed to do some other things. And it varies by state. Yeah. It's not always really well articulated. Like I'd gotten licensed in Montana, and they don't come right out and give an age, they describe it as like this level of maturity, which was always kind of scary for me as a therapist. Like, well, how do you define that? And, so it can be really different from place to place.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is why having these conversations on a regular basis is really critical, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that, okay, so we've just kind of defined consent as the legal holder of privilege. Yeah. And so when you're in a situation where you are a minor, or you are not age, you don't hold your own privilege. This could also be in a conservatorship situation. Then the idea of assent, meaning I still am a part of the decisions that are being made about me, right? It becomes so critical. That idea of nothing about us without us, that good old disability warring cry. If you're going to make decisions about me, you're going to make policies about me, I need to be at the table.
Yeah.
And I just find that we don't do this enough. ABA is, and we've had a lot of conversations on this channel in our podcast about ABA, all the way from the worries about it to what it's trying to do today to improve upon itself and respond to the community, right? To respond to the concerns. But anytime we are with and helping someone, if our goal is really to empower that person, at minimum, assent is necessary.
Yeah, I was always taught, like if you're doing therapy or doing something with a child, that even though legally they're not their own, they don't hold their privilege, they're not their own guardian, you should at least talk to them about what you're going to be doing.
Yep.
So you get what's called oral statement of assurance, which is and then you would document that. You'd say, oh, we're going to do this thing. We're going to play with blocks and I'm going to talk to you and ask you about your parents or something like that.
Yep.
And then document that the kid said, yeah, okay, or that they don't want to talk to you. I've had older kids where even though they're getting their signature isn't legal, you just go through those motions anyway, because it's a piece of respect, right? Because you're doing that with them. It's just sort of like that human element that makes sense to be able to do that. And, we're talking about minors or people that don't have their own privilege, but I've heard stories about adults who own their own privilege, who have signed an informed consent, and then got into a situation they weren't comfortable with and didn't know how to say something or get out of it other than to leave the session and never come back.
Yeah.
There's some shady people out there. I mean, that's sort of the reality of any profession. There's going to be people that aren't following kind of guidelines. And what is it? How do you deal with it at that point? So having those conversations with a prospective therapist is always kind of nice to do that. I would always notice too that when I was working with kids when I was in school, the parents always seemed to appreciate that we were, talking to the kid and saying, we're going to do this thing. And even though your mom said it's okay, I want to see if you're okay with it. I mean, I think it's just a piece of respect for that person as a human, right?
Yeah. I mean, and that we need to also, oftentimes, a lot of clients that I might assess. So I do transition assessments, right? And so I'm working with teenagers on, how do they envision their adult lives? And that ranges because my specialty is really neurodevelopmental complexity. So I'm often working with non-speakers. I mean, it's not uncommon for me to work with a non-speaker. And I think the quick assumption is that language and verbal language is the only signal of intelligence, right? Yeah. And so we get put into this situation where now we don't believe that there's a person that's competent that we're supporting. And that's why we don't ask permission.
Yeah.
And I just think it's the most ridiculous thing of all time. We didn't even make the attempt to ask for permission. And or even narration. Hey, you know what? You know what we're going to be doing together today? I know I'm new to you. Even a narration of, hey, I get what's going on. I know you know.
Yeah.
And
And
I
you know,
believe that you want to be a part of the process of
right.
this.
Yeah. And you've worked with folks like that long enough to have a sense, like, when they know, like,
Ooh,
yeah. Yeah.
I, like a really this happened just yesterday in a school team I was supporting, where the student that I'm supporting hums, and that's a very
Mm-hmm.
regulating thing for her.
Mm-hmm.
So she was in the classroom, and we were having our meeting, and she's in the classroom, but we speak to her. We're like, okay, we know you're there. We're here. Okay, here's what we're talking
Right.
about. And inevitably, when we talk about something important, things get real
Mm-hmm.
quiet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's
That's a
like,
good
listen,
sign.
like we know you. Like,
Yeah.
hey, it got quiet. We know things got serious. Like
Right.
that. And guess what? Now we have less behavioral for you. For
Yeah.
those of you that are just listening to this audio, I have air quotes out. Dina and I use air quotes a lot.
We do.
Dina, where I was like, where our air quotes are out. We just don't collaborate and cooperate enough
Yeah.
with our clients.
And it has a dark history, our field, right? I mean, and there's a big reason for a lot of people to not trust. I mean, if you go all the way back to, radiation experiments that were done on people in the U.S. without people knowing it. I mean, it was done on minority folks because the mindset was they were, subhuman or less than human. There's been research done on people that were not living at home and were institutional settings in our history. Tons of experiments done during World War II by the Nazis. I mean, there's a real dark history that's the other way, in the opposite direction of consent, where we're going to do these things to you. We're not going to tell you what we're doing, or even worse, in my mind, we're going to lie and tell you we're doing this, but we're really doing this. And so, our field and the laws changed, really started to change after World War II and the Nuremberg trials. I mean, that's really where we see when you're doing any sort of research with a human participant, you have to follow certain guidelines. And we also see that consent for therapy following around that time as well. Your and I ethics code is very clear about getting consent. It's very clear about continually checking in about that. It's very clear about it. The burden is on us. So if we don't get consent or we don't continue to check in with that and we just sort of start steamrolling someone, that's not going to help us if they take us to court. We need to be, what I mean by the burden is on us is we're the one that should know. We're the one that has to hold that. So even though the client has privilege, it's our job to hold it for them. So it's not just enough for them to have it. We're the ones that are trained and are supposed to know how to hold that. And things like when someone stops humming, when you're talking about them, you're like, look, see, they're paying attention to what's happening. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I like that, Dana. I like that, I don't know what happened, but when just because therapists are therapists or psychologists or doesn't mean that we know everything.
Right.
Like, we work together with clients in a relationship, and relationships are transactional. They go back and forth.
Right.
And I feel like, especially when I'm working with people who are very sensitive to how fast and how much, like how fast things are going or how much something's coming out, like how big it is that, right? So if I'm not considering load and pace, what we would call load and pace, and I've got someone who has difficulty with language, like whose responsibility is that? It's mine.
Right, exactly.
It's mine. Like, I really feel like that's my responsibility. So anyway, this came up and, Dana and I, we are so lucky that we get to talk about these topics that come up in our lives, in our professional lives day to day. And, it's not unusual for Dana to reach out to me or me to reach out to Dana and say, Dana, we got to talk about this.
Yeah, exactly.
In our next episode. So for those of you out there that are in therapy or in any kind of intervention, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, ABA, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Okay. You're in psychological, like mental health there. Like, okay, fine.
Yeah. Yep.
You have the right to be a part of your therapy in a cooperative
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And you're allowed to stop it at any time. I mean, that's a thing that people don't
Yes.
realize. Yeah.
Or that idea that consent can change.
Yeah.
Like, even though you said yes and things get hot and you're like, oh, you can change your mind.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's a good therapeutic relationship, right? Like if someone says, oh, this is getting too hard, I'll back off and say, okay, well, my goal isn't to come in and break all the dishes. Let's go slow. Yeah. Right? The bull in the china shop. Maybe one or two, but not all of them. Yeah.
Dana, okay. First of all, I had a visual of you. Like, just like, like, you know, like, just like, tossing the dish. I mean, no, it's true. Our job is not to come in and remove all the coping strategies, or I like that, to break all the dishes. It's just something that I've been feeling so strongly about, as I see so many of my clients just in situations where they're like, well, the therapist, the professional knows better than I do. And now they're just put in a very dysregulated position. And now there's harm that's being done. And so I just want to like empower people to say no with professionals. And
it's really, it's sort of is this basic human conundrum too. I mean, just think about all that's going on in the world and so on. And we, could talk a lot about the patriarchy and people that are in charge and people that don't have political power versus those that do. And there's so much about, what's happening to us that isn't about our choice. Therapy shouldn't be something that you don't have a choice in, whether it's you having your own ownership or someone else doing it for you. You should still have a say. Yeah,
absolutely.
Whether that's verbal or not. Right.
Yeah. Your emotional space and maintaining safety in your emotional space is top priority.
Yeah.
Priority. That is your internal private space.
Yeah.
And what's hard is this is why long-term, I think good, solid, long-term therapeutic relationships, a therapist becomes very keen or attuned to their client. And so, there are times when like, I know, I'm just going to do a check in here because I'm seeing something that I know, I've worked with you for a while. I know what this means. Do we need to take a break? Do we need to pause? Do we need talk to me? That's the benefit of that. But man, if you don't have that and you've not learned how to advocate or you don't have good interoception. I mean, we've spoken about interoception before. It's just really challenging. It takes two to create that safe space, and Assent is a big part of that. And I think if you're a therapist listening to this, like, you can't ask for assent enough or permission enough or check in enough.
Right, exactly.
Like, please. Anyway, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, should we just end? Please. We'll just end it.
And our listeners are going, please, I'd like you to stop now. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Please let this episode be over. All right. On that note, everyone, peace out. Be good to you. As Dana says, be good to you.
Yes. See you next time.